welcome back. My name's Chris. This is Marcus. We're talking Fabric Data Warehouses. And today, I understand, Marcus, we're going into low code, no code data warehouse loading. What is this?
Yeah, so today we're going to go into that low code, no code experience with Fabric Dataflows. And we're going to show you how to ingest a set of files from a blob storage again and create a new data warehouse table from that data flow experience without writing any code.
All right, man, let's see it. Let's get into it.
Sounds good. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And within our data warehouse experience within Microsoft Fabric, we're going to go ahead and select a new Dataflow Gen2. And as that's pulling up, you can see here the initial screen for our data flow. Before we get into any transformations or any data load, we're going to go ahead and rename this. At the top left here, I'm going to call this DF for data flow underscore customer blob to warehouse, WH, and we'll have that be our data flow name.
Love it.
Since I am going to be copying data from a blob storage account, and I don't see that in my quick pick options here, I'm going to go ahead and select get data from another source. You'll notice here when I click that, we get a very similar experience, Power Query Online experience that you may be familiar with if you've used data flows before Microsoft Fabric was released. So if I click View More, notice the hundreds and hundreds of connectors that are simply available out of the box that Microsoft has provided within Fabric, within this data flows experience. Pretty amazing.
Wow. Wow.
So for this example, it really is. And for this example, I'm going to select Azure Blobs here. And I'm going to set up my connection. So I'm going to go ahead and paste in my account or URL from my blob storage. I'm going to make sure the authentication kind is anonymous. I'm going to go ahead and click Next. Here's a preview of what that blob storage account holds. Again, this is Microsoft's public blob storage account with sample data in there. We're going to refine this more as we get into our data flow query. So as this is pulling up, we're going to need to do some filtering of the different files within this blob storage because we certainly wouldn't want to try and load every single file from the blob storage in a single data flow. That will not work. So we need to refine that down to just the files that we want to copy over and create our new table within our data warehouse. While this is pulling up, I am going to name this query dim customer because that is going to be the eventual table name that we will create in our data warehouse. Within here, we do want to filter down to a specific type of table. So to do that, we're going to quickly go down and find our table extension here that we want. So we can see scrolling down, I want to go ahead and get this line of text here in line 109 because this is going to start the section of the dimension customer files that we want to load that are in CSV file format type. So now I'm going to go back up to my name column here in my files after I've copied that text, and I'm going to do a text filter. And I'm going to pick begins with. And I'm going to paste that full string in there of that name, but I'm going to remove part of it so that we pull back all of the dimension customer files that we're concerned with for the load. And I'm going to click OK. Now we're almost there with the files that we want to load, but notice there are a couple files here that don't have an extension tied to it that have to do with the way that blob storage captures your files in the way that they're saved. So we're going to go ahead and remove the blank extension rows so that we're just left with the CSV file types.
So Marcus, it looks like one of the best practices in data flows and in Power BI has always been to do your filter transformations first. Does that best practice extend to Dataflow Gen2 as well?
It sure does, Chris. You want to filter out your refined data set or row set that you want to eventually consume in that data flow query as far upstream as possible in your steps. When we talk about that, our applied steps menu on the right here, we want to have those filtering steps as far up the path in these applied steps as possible. So right after our source, we go into our filtering steps, and now we can do our transformations and data load steps after that for our refined data set.
That's awesome.
Now, Chris, here, I want you to be ready for some serious Power Query magic here that's about to happen without having to write any code. We are going to take all of these CSV files, and Power Query is going to intuitively combine all the contents of these 6 CSV files with one click of the button. If I click the double arrow on the content column here, Power Query is going to understand all of the files that have similar column names, and it is going to combine all of those files into a single query.
Wow.
So without having to write any code, I have now taken the contents of all of those files and created a single query that combines those CSV files into one. Now, you'll notice that some of the column headers came through in that query. So there's a couple cleanup steps that we want to do before defining our destination table into our warehouse.
Okay.
So the first thing we're going to do is in the transform menu at the top, we're going to use our first row as our header row. So now that we have our headers defined, because of all the transformations that happened with loading those files, Power Query has also added a new column defining where the data came from in that file name. For this example, we're going to remove this column. So I'm going to right click on this column and click Remove Columns. And then the last thing I'm going to do is, because it repeated my header rows for each file that it included in this dim customer query, I'm going to click on the customer key column and I'm going to filter out all the values that contain customer key, which would represent that header row. Okay. So now I believe I have all the records that I want to load into my dim customer table, but we have one more step to finish before we can publish this data flow. We need to select a destination for this data coming through the data flow. So in the lower right-hand corner, or in our query menu at the top, I'm going to define a destination. So I'm going to use the lower right-hand menu here, and I'm going to select warehouse as my data destination. I'm going to click that Microsoft Fabric warehouse connector and click next. And within my Fabric workspace here, I'm going to select the BT demo warehouse as my destination. I'm going to define my table name, which is going to be dim customer. And I'm going to select the new table option, which requires me to write 0 code and automatically have this table created as a new table in my data warehouse. If you have an existing table defined, let's say from our last video, you used a T-SQL statement to define a table, you could select an existing table to land that data into from your data flow. I'm going to click next here. And then in our update method at the top, we need to select either replace or append for our data flow. Since this is brand new data that we're initially loading into our table, I'm going to select the append option. And notice below, I can define different data types based on the destination. Now, since this table is automatically getting created for me, Data Flows has picked text for the initial data type for all my columns. So for right now, I'm just going to leave that as text for all my columns. I'm going to go ahead and save my settings there. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit publish. Notice if I hit the down arrow here in the lower right hand corner, you could save your changes and select publish later, or select publish now to have your changes be published as is and have your data start loading into your warehouse via this data flow. So I'm going to hit publish now. And if I scroll down to my menu here, we can see that that DF customer blob to warehouse is beginning to load. And once our changes are finished publishing, we'll see a refresh timestamp here. And we can navigate then to our warehouse to ensure that the data has been loaded into that dim customer table.
Well, that was fantastically easy.
Yeah, it really was, Chris. I didn't have to write any code. We saw some of the Power Query magic that can happen with combining similarly formatted files together. Again, without me having to do anything but button clicking in the UI there, and being able to take that set of files and load it directly into my data warehouse into a new table that my data flow created for me.
Well, that's just awesome, Marcus. Thank you for walking us through how we could do this again with low code, no code, or with the existing skills of our entire Power BI user base. So that's fantastic. I honestly, I can't wait to see what we could do next.
Possibilities are endless. Make sure to come back for our next video.
All right. We'll see you then.